Can you all hear me okay? Brilliant. Before I start off really about Sir Peter Scott's journey, I just wanted to sort of explain about my journey and how I became interested in the Ouse Washes and its natural history. When I was a young boy at school in Whittlesea, and I always saw the fens and the washes at a distance on the knee washes, sort of the sister of the Ouse Washes. And me and my friend decided to go for a walk across to the washes, and we walked along the washes and jumped over loads of gates, got to the River Nene, still on the bank, and there must have been at least about 30,000 widgeon all got up, and big skies, massive amount of wildfowl. And I think it was that spark which got me interested in, not so much interested in wildlife, but wanted to make it as a career. Shortly after, this big tall guy with a big fluffy beard came running after us, saying that we've scared all of the wildfowl, and thankfully he didn't recognise us when I went for a job interview many years ago. But it's been a really delight and pleasure to sort of take a step back and learn more about Sir Peter Scott. Just for interest, who knows of Sir Peter Scott? Could you raise your hands? So he's done a good job. So he was he's a local boy really. There we go. So that photograph was taken in 1910, and that's Robert Falcon Scott with Sir Peter Scott as the baby, and he was only 1 year old then, and his name came from the novel book of Peter Pan. So that's where his name came from. Now, we've all seen this classic photograph of Robert Falcon Scott on the advent of the exploration of the Antarctic in 1912. Unfortunately, they all died during this exploration, but it raised so much awareness of British exploration. But also, Falcon Scott, he wrote a note before he died, and in that note, he sent to his wife Kathleen, make the boy interested in natural history. And that's quite a really important part of Sir Peter Scott's life. So, Sir Peter Scott, he went to study in Oundle School, spent many years there, and this is a picture of him with his Zanuo on his shoulder here, the young lad, and also you've got Sir Peter Scott with a nene on the front of the canoe. But interestingly, he studied in Cambridge. He studied natural science in the Trinity College, but then he went on to also study architecture and art. And during most of his childhood, he was so interested in natural history. He spent many days, hours, just painting the wildlife, observing the wildlife, and that was the start as well of this amazing career and how it became today. So, but during this time, Sir Peter Scott, whilst he's in Cambridge, is making the most of this area in the fens. It has a lot to offer. It's a flat landscape, but as you've seen this morning, on how much it has to offer. So, when he was studying in Cambridge, he spent lots of times doing dinghy sailing in the Great Ouse. Just out here, he was tic-tacking across the Ouse, and because of that, he became Olympic medalist. Because he understood that the rivers gave him the best advantage in the Olympic tournaments. So, you can't imagine that just out there, Peter Scott was out there on boats, as we've been listening to this morning. But also ice skating in the winter on the fens, a massive and popular sport in the fens at that time of year. But also wildfowling was a part. And I think that was his first experience of the Ouse Washes. Particularly down at the Sutton and Erith end of the Ouse Washes. And he spent many nights out there with his friends out punt gunning. They brought this punt gun. It was a sea kayak punt gun, and basically they tarred it up. They used lots of tar and to coat these boats to make sure they're waterproof, which is obviously what you need for boats. And his experiences of the washes was then. So after his experiences of the Ouse Washes, the amazing full skies and winter in wildfowl, he went to move on to spend his few years at the East Lighthouse on the mouth of the River Leigh. And this is where he was getting really interested in the conservation issues around the UK, around globally. And he based here doing painting. He also studied in Munich and in London for art as well. And then shortly after living in the lighthouse, he then became served as a lieutenant on a destroyer of HMS Broke, and then senior officer on the flotilla steam gunboats during the war. And Sir Peter Scott actually designed the night camouflage for all of the boats during the war as well. So a very ingenuitive chap. And then shortly after the war, he in January 1945, he went off to Severn Estuary to look for lesser white-fronted geese. They're very small geese, like a greylag, but they have a very distinctive golden orbital ring around its eye. And he found 2 of these birds amongst 2,000 white-fronted geese. And it was there where he decided that he wanted to set up the Wildfowl Trust, what it was known then. And this is Sir Peter Scott in his house at Slimbridge, with a great window of all the winter in wildfowl. Brilliant. From going on from there, he done many paintings to earn his living, to still rally for conservation issues, trying to protect what's around us. And during his time, and on top of all of this, he also founded the World Wildlife Fund. And he was the chairman of the World Wildlife Fund, and he painted the panda that we all see and support these days. But also he spent many days and hours broadcasting on TV, radio. He done a natural history program called the Look series. And he wrote 18 books, which I'm proud to say I've read 5 of them during trying to research this. And but also illustrated up to over 20 books as well. You can buy these books at our Welney Wetland Centre if you're interested as well. But it's the Buick Swan which really captured Sir Peter's imagination. You will see this is the Buick Swan here, and this is what the Welney Wetland Centre is famous for, and they also had these at Slimbridge. But if you look very closely at its beak, you'll see that it's got a nice yellow blob on its beak there. Now, Sir Peter, when he was painting these swans, the Buick swans, realised that every individual blob of yellow on a Buick swan is different. So over time, he started painting all the different beaks, colours of the Buick swan. And every year they were returning back to Slimbridge. He was able to identify individual Buick swans by his paintings. I think that between himself and Daphla Scott, who lives locally, continued to do this, and they painted about 2,500 different bill patterns, which is phenomenal. These days, we're not very good painters at Welney, so we use coloured rings on their legs with numbers, which identifies individual birds. But this is a huge part, and now 50 years of research has gone on from this initial painting and studying to where it is now protecting and enhancing the Bewick's, which you'll see all around the fens at the moment, because we are so important for Bewick swans in this area. And this is what really, how it came to Welney. So Sir Peter Scott had a phone call from one of our trustees, and Vincent Weir, and he telephoned Sir Peter Scott and said, just if you're interested, there's 100 acres of wetlands going on the Ouse Washes, and it's about £40 an acre. That was tell you how, and that was in 1967. And Sir Peter Scott's words were snap, and that was the beginning of Welney and how it all became. And since these 100 acres of land was purchased, he had this inspiration of getting people out to see these wetlands. And I think that's a really important part. He thought, he didn't keep it enclosed. He wanted people to see what this amazing site here on the Ouse Washes is all about. And in 1979, he encouraged over 1,000 Bewick swans right in front of the observatory. And this was the first wildlife spectacle that you could see on the Ouse Washes, and still today, of these swans. So you've got some news reports and pictures of the Ouse Washes. Just here is Josh Scott, no relation to Peter Scott, but Josh Scott was the first warden on the Ouse Washes. He lived not too far from the Welney village, by the suspension bridge, and he basically was a wildfowler himself, punt gunner, traditional fen boy, and he worked and lived on the fens. And Sir Peter Scott realised that he would be the best candidate to help protect the Welney sanctuary then, and also to manage it because of his skills and backgrounds of that site. Because in them days, and still today, it's so important to have people that can understand the Ouse Washes and the site, because it's such a complex area. The observatory here is quite a unique hide. It's heated, which most of you are probably aware. An amazing heated observatory, because it's mostly used in the winter time, but also it's the lights that work in the night time. Now, Sir Peter had the Duke of Edinburgh come over to Slimbridge to spend the night to see the birds, but he realised that all the birds would be out at night, so they devised basically screwing on lots of halogen lights on the hide, and they gradually got the birds used to the halogen lights at Slimbridge, and the Duke of Edinburgh was able to enjoy all of the birds lit up by halogen lights, and that was the mark of how all of our other sites, and at Welney in particular, where you see swans and birds lit up through these lights, which you wouldn't normally see during the day. And sadly, Peter died in 1989, but it's his legacy and his work over these years that is achieved. He's been an Olympic medalist. He brought the Nene goose, from the Hawaiian goose, back from extinction, pretty much near to extinction, to now a fruitful sort of population. We've now got 10 sites around the UK, all protecting wetlands, protecting all of the wetlands as you see here, but also, most importantly, sort of rejuvenating and telling generations about how important our natural history is in this area. And now, similar work that's been going on with the spoonbill sandpiper, which is an equally as important project that we've undertook a few years ago. But it's this imagination, this out-of-the-box thinking, which Sir Peter Scott has left to all of us to think about. And he was kind of seen in them days as the modern conservationist. And we're kind of continuing his legacy and doing what we're doing. So, thank you.